After a quick road trip through the French parts of Canada, including Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City, perhaps it was a good idea to stop and take a break. Yet, I decided to keep going and try exploring something a bit closer to home. After traveling around the world, many locals and adventurers that I spoke with had more desire to explore something new as opposed to taking a deeper dive into their own home country. The grass is always greener on the other side, as the expression goes. And for a long time, I thought the same. But now that I was both financially independent and free to do whatever I wanted, it was time to give my hometown of Toronto the adventure that it deserved. The Canadian Dream. I barely knew Toronto, despite growing up here. And even still, the city had evolved so much since first arriving here as a child back in 1994. My father, mother, and I managed to escape Soviet Russia before the collapse in 1991. We arrived in Israel as refugees during a time when Israel was also having conflicts of their own. My very first memory was sitting in the bathtub with my mom while wearing gas masks and listening to loud emergency sirens as Saddam Hussein launched chemical rockets into Israel. Thus, in 1992, my dad put in the hard work of being the first to fly to Toronto to seek out a safer life for us. He learned English, earned a bit of cash, and spoke with a lawyer to find out how to bring my mother and I to Toronto. After 6 months of working in Toronto, he flew back to Israel and we waited. By May of 1994, he received a phone call from the Canadian lawyer and everything was good to go. One evening, he showed me the Boeing 747 that we would be flying on our way to new lands. Canada is one of those countries that seeks to continuously boost the economy with an influx of new, creative, and hard-working immigrants. My father at the time was a professional chef and according to the immigration criteria, received a full 10 out of 10 score for entry into Canada. This 10 out of 10 score was normally given to construction engineers, computer scientists, doctors, nurses, and anyone else that was perceived as a high-value talent. So, in the summer of '94, we arrived in Toronto. In the autumn of that year, I would enter my first junior school and begin learning a new language while quickly forgetting Hebrew from Israel and my mother tongue of Russian. The days would quickly transition into months, waking up in the twilight of the cold Toronto mornings, walking with my parents to school, going to class, and waiting to go home, day after day. My parents would continue to work, day by day, slowly improving our socio-economic status in life. My dad would work as a professional chef, while my mom would work as a Starbucks barista. Months would turn into years, and we would move from one apartment to another and to another, each time upgrading thanks to the hard work of both of my parents. We would eventually buy our first car, a boxy Toyota, and things continued to improve. I would graduate from junior school and move to a primary school in a completely different part of Toronto. Making new friends, being taught by new teachers, creating new adventures, getting into school fights, and learning how to use computers for the first time. From the reality of being a kid, the world was enormous. 1 kilometer in any direction was more than enough to create many adventures and memories. Middle school and cadets. From primary school, I would go into middle school, leaving one reality and entering a new one, with new friends, realities, and even receiving my first kiss from a girl. I also watched passively as the relationship between my parents deteriorated like many families around the world. They enrolled me into the Canadian Army Cadets at the age of 12 to take some pressure off their busy work and relationship lives. In cadets, I would be forced to wake up at 5 a.m., quickly make up my bed, follow orders, stand in formation for hours on end, clean and shoot rifles, polish my shoes, go on fun adventures, and deal with the occasional aggressive bullies. Eventually, my parents would go through a complicated divorce, and I would end up living back and forth between my father and mother in different parts of Toronto. Luckily, the effect of the divorce was minimal on my psyche since I was completely preoccupied with the dopamine rush of video games and computers. Eventually, from middle school, I would go into high school at the age of 14, but in this case, the change was even more drastic. I would lose all of my friends from both junior and middle school for a completely new reality. High school from the bottom to the top. From being a moderately decent student in middle school, my high school grades would gradually decline to the new environment. You are the average of the people you surround yourself with, and this high school was definitely leaving a negative impact on my educational performance, whether it was due to higher levels of aggression from other students or friends who thought playing video games was more important than studying. My first 2 years of high school were not productive. I would even leave the Army Cadets most likely due to the poor performance of those I surrounded myself with in high school. But then one day I had a falling out with my mother. Whatever happened, it affected me deeply enough to go and live with my father in the city of Oshawa, far, far away from Toronto. Once again, new friends, new teachers, and new realities. But interestingly enough, this new high school had high achievers. Even the cool kids were academically driven and engaged in a lot of sports. Through simple sociological osmosis, my motivation, grades, and drive to study increased. By the end of 2 years, I was in the top tier of students, graduating with honors. University and a new passion. Luckily, the city of Oshawa also had a university and college, so I would enter into the Faculty of Science to study pharmaceutical chemistry. But this is where things became interesting. Since I never had a girlfriend in high school, I thought to myself, what do women enjoy? And since my mother was passionate about dancing, I thought it would be a great idea to learn dancing. So I started a salsa club in my university. I would learn a couple moves from YouTube videos with a fellow female friend, and we would practice. Then, during the weekends, I would venture back to Toronto and hit up the salsa nightclubs to practice these new moves. Then, during the week, I would teach the moves to other students at my university and college campus. Interestingly enough, when you learn and teach at the same time, you learn even faster because you gain an even deeper understanding. Thus, I would teach at my university and college with no financial incentive, and basically just because I became passionate about salsa dancing. During the weekends, I would hop on a bus and travel 2 hours back to my mother in Toronto, and in the evenings, I would hit up various salsa dancing clubs. I would go salsa dancing 2 to 3 times per week, club after club, event after event, deep in the heart of Toronto. During the summer months, when the university was on break, I got a job in Toronto as a student employee in a government agency. For the first 2 months, I was relegated to cleaning buses, but eventually I was upgraded to a data entry clerk, entering numbers into a system all day long. Because this job was back in Toronto, this gave me more time to go out and explore various events, parties, and salsa dancing clubs in Toronto. 4 years would go by like this, studying at university and college, teaching salsa, going to Toronto to dance even more salsa, and working as a student employee. The idea of financial freedom. After 4 years of teaching salsa at my university, I decided it was time to focus on finding a way to make money online. So I handed the salsa club over to another friend and started delving into the world of online income. During my final 8 months of study, a female friend introduced me to financial trading, and immediately I hopped onto this idea as a ticket out of monotony. While studying some menial courses in these last few months of college, I delved as deep as possible into financial trading, reading almost everything there was to learn, from psychology to sociology to statistics and the technical aspects of this new reality. I even used $5,000 of my university money as initial capital to figure out how this thing worked. And finally, after 4 years and 8 months of university and college, I graduated and immediately started the monotonous office work life, while at the same time investing a great deal of time, energy, and money into learning and trading on the financial markets. The new job was in Toronto, so I would end up returning to live with my mother in Toronto. The work-life monotony and hope. I started work during the frigid and bleak months of 2011. Wake up tired at 7 a.m. in darkness, drive to work tired in a torrent of traffic, and arrive at work to drown myself with coffee to overcome the sleepiness. I would sit at my computer desk for hours on end solving some trivial reports and technical computer issues. Then, after work, get back in my car exhausted and slowly drive home in traffic once more to enter zombie mode for the rest of the evening. The only thing that really gave me hope and excitement was figuring out the financial markets. Essentially, I had found an automated trading system that would game the financial markets. It would trade in very small amounts for $1 to $3 profit each time, but the trades would occur 20 to 30 times per day. In the meantime, my first job went on for 4 solid months until I decided to upgrade to a higher paying job. I would also move out of my mom's house and live with a good friend from my university days. For the first month, not much changed. Wake up, traffic, sit at work exhausted, drive home in traffic, and enter zombie mode for the rest of the evening. Even my office window view was the insane bumper-to-bumper traffic that occurs from morning to night on the Don Valley Parkway. But now the automated trading system was getting consistent. And by June of 2011, I was making roughly $2,000 to $3,000 profit per month from the system. At this point, I quit my job, thus no longer having to wake up at 7 a.m. in the morning, no need to get stuck in traffic, and thus becoming completely free to do whatever I wanted. A taste of freedom. And so began the summer of 2011 with total freedom. Despite a massive roller coaster of ups and downs, the automated trading system would do its thing, earning a couple dozen or $100 per day. Meanwhile, I would be adventuring and doing whatever I wanted. My best friend and I would make new friends in the Toronto salsa scene, going to different events, parties, socials, and everything in between. I bought a camera and started taking up the skill of photography, taking snapshots of some of my best memories in Toronto. And when I had nothing planned, I would simply stay at home and play a video game called World of Warcraft, all the while checking how much money was made that day. I invested all of the money I had earned from work into the automated trading system. I invested the money I had on loan from my university, and even some cash from my parents, as I would promise them a % return on their investment. Even my ego became inflated, as I thought this would never end, thinking I was better than everyone else because I was going to be rich. But like many things in life, it ultimately came crashing down hard. Ego back to earth. As a young guy full of testosterone and a lack of patience, I increased the risk too much on the automated trading system, and I ended up losing everything. I lost the money I got as a loan from my university, the money I had earned from my job, and even the money my parents invested with me. In total, I lost $24,000, which at the time was everything. I was bankrupt and broke. And because of the unpredictable nature of the financial markets and the massive roller coaster of ups and downs, I decided that path was no longer for me, thus giving up on the idea of an automated trading system. I went on government financial assistance, received a loan from my parents, and started looking for a job once more. But even still, I wasn't willing to go back to the drudgery of sitting in an office, instead looking for promotional jobs. The first promotional gig was simply handing out sugary sodas on the streets of Toronto, or helping a friend move from one apartment to another for some much needed cash. All the while, I started making websites for various friends and clients, even building a website for a car repair shop because I didn't have enough money to pay them. Yet, building websites was frustrating because they took a long time to build for clients and the pay averaged out to $2 to $3 an hour. Slowly moving up again. Eventually, I started getting better promotional jobs for various technology companies, showing people how to use laptops and phones. While at the same time, I started delving into internet marketing. After a couple months of building websites and trying out different internet marketing strategies, I discovered the idea of simply sending phone calls to clients that needed customers. In the beginning, I was making $10 a day from this while still working as a promoter. And as the promotional gigs got better, so did the internet marketing money, from $10 a day to $20 to $30 to $50 a day online per day. Over the course of the next year and a half in Toronto, I would gradually rebuild my financial well-being. By the summer of 2013, I had saved enough and I was making several $1,000s a month, but this time from internet marketing. So I thanked the company I was promoting for and returned back to a life of doing what I wanted to do. Toronto became my playground once again. I could, once more, wake up when I wanted and adventure whenever I wanted. Leaving Toronto. By the fall of 2013, my roommate and best buddy for the past 2 years decided to leave and find his own path, so I began living with a new friend. The autumn months of 2013 was an awesome experience because Toronto felt like a playground of activities and adventures. By the winter months of 2013, my roommate and I wanted to leave Toronto. We created grandiose plans to go live together in Buenos Aires, Argentina. But when the time came to commit to those plans, his job didn't afford him the ability to travel and work at the same time. So, since I was now making money completely on the internet, I decided to make my own path. I packed my things, sold what I didn't need anymore, and traveled to new lands outside of Toronto, starting with Southeast Asia. A whirlwind of travel. The first 6 months of this journey, I visited 10 countries in Southeast Asia, creating some of the best experiences and stories of my life. After 6 months of hardcore traveling, I would return for a refresh in Toronto while bringing with me a fresh set of perspectives on life. During this time in Toronto, I became infatuated with a girl who I thought was the one for me. But she eventually broke my heart, so I decided to escape back into the world of travels. Another 6 to 8 months quickly went by, hopping from one country to another country, living in some while only traveling in others. Toronto, while still being my home base, would simply become a temporary stopover. In 2015, I even rented an apartment in the very heart of Toronto in the Aura condo on the highest floor that was most affordable. And while this was a great experiment, after 2 months, it was time to travel once more. So in 2016, I expanded my reality with over 20 countries in Europe, even traveling to my birthplace of St. Petersburg, Russia. I would only return to Toronto in the summer of 2017 for a single month to refresh before flying out once more. 2017 was another tour of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, while also visiting the mythical lands of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. I would eventually return to Canada to invest into the FOMO of 2018 right before the bubble popped. Once the crypto bubble of 2018 had popped, I lost a large chunk of my savings. So, feeling a bit lost, I decided to leave for Mexico, which was just a bit closer than Europe and Asia. After a massive adventure through Mexico, I came back to Toronto due to food poisoning and catching 2 food-related parasites. In the summer months of 2018, a really great buddy of mine from the salsa dancing days asked me to be the best man at his wedding. So I stayed in Toronto for 5 months to fulfill his request. But after the mission was complete, it was back to Mexico for almost a full year. Eastern Europe and pandemics. By the start of 2019, I received word that a friend of mine was going with like-minded internet marketers to live in Ukraine. So I decided to tag along to get to know them as people and their internet marketing ideas. Eventually, from Ukraine, I would hop into Belarus, and in Belarus, I eventually got stuck there into the pandemic of 2020. Yet, interestingly enough, while the world was shutting down and all borders were closing, the Belarusian president decided to keep everything open. In an interview of what to do if you get sick, he simply stated, drink some vodka, visit the sauna, and return back to work. Thus, while Canada was in complete lockdown and entering a phase of psychological depression, Belarus remained relatively open for gyms, restaurants, clubs, bars, and everything in between. But once again, this relative freedom didn't last, since I was eventually ejected from Belarus and sent back home to Canada. In Toronto, I finally got a taste of the long lines outside of supermarkets and the religious use of masks and physical distancing. A social phenomenon that, for several months, was only visible in the news on YouTube. So instead of sticking around in Toronto, I decided to hop back into Mexico, which had very relaxed restrictions. But what about Toronto? I ended up staying in Mexico for an entire year while the pandemic around the world was being figured out. Getting back into Canada wasn't easy due to the new restrictions, but I managed to fulfill the objectives step by step. But instead of cooling off from traveling, I decided to make a quick road trip into Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City. And by the time I got back, I had a strong desire to see how Toronto had evolved. Every year I had returned to Toronto, various sections of the city were being gentrified. Small shops that had been a staple to some corners of the city had now been radically transformed into 70-story condominiums. Warehouses, factories, and breweries that sat abandoned were now transformed into gentrified apartment complexes. The skyline would become more and more densely packed with new skyscrapers on all sides. Lakefront areas that were previously patches of cement were transformed into parks and beaches for recreational activities and summertime sunbathing. The general feel of people felt the same. Everyone going about their day with no issues or potential threats of violence or robbery or police corruption. I would ride around on a scooter with almost $4,000 of accessories, and not once did I feel uneasy. Most areas felt safe. Only 2 areas of Toronto felt risky and dangerous, but this was nothing compared to what I had seen outside of Canada. Honestly, living in Toronto feels like life on easy mode compared to other parts of the world. It's a city full of job opportunities, money to be made, top-notch healthcare, and a system that supports you when you fall down in the social and economic ladder. While at the same time, the city is so multicultural that no one cares where you're from. You are not a unicorn by any means. The only social contract you need to fulfill is respecting everyone equally, regardless of gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual preference, beliefs, etc. The culture of Toronto is very accepting to all beliefs, while at the same time not caring too much about what yours is. Friendliness, just like most major multicultural cities, is not a priority. But respecting others is a given and a requirement. In conclusion, Toronto was my stomping ground for adventures for half of my life, and will have a special place for the memories it gave me. From growing up here, to adventuring, to going out night after night to the salsa dance scene, to going bankrupt and recovering, and ultimately giving me the safety and security to achieve freedom. Objectively, Toronto will most likely remain in the top cities in the world to live and thrive in. At this point in my life, I enjoy a little more adventure in my choices of places to live. But if you want to settle down and build a stable and safe life, then Toronto is definitely the place to be. And finally, if you simply want to visit and adventure in Toronto, you definitely have that as well. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and maybe even leave a comment. And as always, Leonidas here, and salute.